I never expected my name on Forbes to be the thing that humiliated me. When the TV flashed the Forbes billionaires list that Saturday night, the room was already loud with wine and congratulations. My mother, glowing in a new blouse, cheeks flushed from the promotion she'd been waiting months to announce, raised her glass and said, "Maybe if you were more like your sister," with that small sigh that has always felt like a verdict. I laughed out of reflex. The sentence landed like a pebble in water and the ripples reached me later. For a second we all cheered again, toasts and clinking glasses, until the lower third on the television blinked and then my name scrolled across the screen. A full name, verified, beside a net worth number that stunned half the room into silence. The room froze mid-laugh. My father's fork paused halfway to his mouth. My brother gave an awkward smile that didn't reach his eyes. For a heartbeat I tried to feel what everyone else must feel, pride, vindication. All I felt was the room tipping. I am Lilly, and by 32 I'd built something quiet and strange, a company that grew out of a messy idea, perseverance, and a few sleepless years. I had not told my family much. They were old school, always comparing, always saving comments for the one they thought made it. The Forbes name felt like proof. But their reaction wasn't the triumph I expected. It was a pivot point. The TV light washed over the table, the casserole smelled like rosemary and something burnt in the oven. My mother's smile was thin and bright. "How did that happen?" she whispered to my sister, who had already turned her attention toward dessert, delighted to have the floor. I felt something cool tighten inside my chest, a recognition that I was not the center of this story in the way I'd thought I might be. I wanted to say, "This is mine." But the words were swallowed by the applause everyone gave the TV personality who explained the list, and by the way my family immediately used the moment on their own terms. The celebration continued, just not for me. I would later realize that the Forbes article was the second time my name appeared where it shouldn't have. I grew up in a house that measured success in promotions, neatly ironed shirts, and loyalty to a firm handshake. Mom was the type who believed in steady climbs and small recognitions, now a junior attorney celebrating a new title. My sister, practiced at social currency, had always been the golden child. I was the quiet one who disappeared into textbooks, late-night codes, and the hum of a second-hand laptop. I started my company in a studio apartment with a broken coffee maker and a stubborn belief that a small idea could fix a common problem. I worked with contractors, taught myself legal basics, and told myself that being meticulous was more powerful than being loud. My first product launched quietly, stores took a chance. A tech incubator provided mentorship, a small angel investor lent belief more than money. The business grew in increments, percentages, quarterly reports, SEO rankings. There were nights of joy and nights of failure, and each victory felt private-owned. Early on I promised myself I would never be defined by family opinions. But I also wanted them to know, to see, that whatever their measure of success, I had mine. That's why I texted my mother that day, a screenshot of the Forbes page, small and grainy, a message that said, "We made it." She replied with heart emojis, but at dinner, her body language said something else. It's strange, you can build something monumental and still find yourself shrinking when people you love measure you by a different yardstick. The private cost of building a public life can be weirdly intimate. Late-night emails, the hum of servers, the taste of instant coffee. Yet the quiet victories mattered to me. I kept folders with receipts and contracts, not because I wanted to boast, but because proof mattered in ways emotion couldn't replace. If this hits home, tell me where you're watching from. Success comes with forms. NDAs, term sheets, payables. My desk began to look like a law office. I hired an accountant and a contract specialist. I began trusting people with access. my CFO, a childhood friend who managed operations, and a marketing team that could push narratives far and wide. I learned to read between the lines of legalese and to find the quiet inconsistency in optimistic pitch decks. The first crack was small, a misrouted invoice that showed payments to a consultancy I hadn't hired. I asked about it in a meeting, and everyone smiled like they were talking about a weather change. "Oh, that's John's side project," someone said. I made a mental note and moved on. Later, a partner thanked me privately for being the quiet backbone that made everything run. At home, my mother began offering advice on things she didn't understand but claimed to know, like my payroll and benefits. "You should consider a family prenup," she said once, light as a napkin, and I laughed. It felt like friendly input, classic family overreach. But notes and favors started appearing in my inbox: preferential treatment for my sister's ventures, calls from my father's contacts promising connections. There were smiles and small favors that added up like quiet interest on a loan. I began to collect things: emails, dated receipts, the odd text message that didn't quite match what people said out loud. It felt obsessive to someone who had always been told to let things slide. Still, the tiny injustices built a pattern. And patterns are something you can litigate, figuratively, with patience and documentation, and literally, if you must. One night the pattern resolved into a public humiliation I didn't see coming. 3 months after that dinner, a national lifestyle magazine requested an interview. They wanted the origin story, who supported me, which mentors mattered. I thought about who to mention: the incubator, the early investors, but the reporter made a gentle but persistent ask: family involvement. I obliged, describing childhood habits and a mother who taught me to present myself with calm. They loved the detail. The piece ran online and on a Sunday morning segment. That morning my mother called, excited. "They made you sound so grounded," she said. But then a clip appeared, an edited segment where the reporter, chasing viral angles, juxtaposed my story with my mother's promotion and my sister's new home. The segment suggested we were a family of achievers, and as a joke, the reporter leaned into a line that wasn't mine. It was a throwaway voiceover: "Maybe if you were more like your sister," they said, and then cut to my mother smiling. The line wasn't in the interview transcript. It was manufactured, but the clip made it look otherwise. The internet is merciless with a soundbite. The clip circulated with comments that felt personal instead of public. Family group texts filled with screenshots and LOLs. People reached out to congratulate my sister. People called my mother to ask what made me different. I tried to explain to my mom that this was edited, but she smiled and said, "It's publicity, honey." She chalked it up to banter, and I let her. I should have been angrier. A week later, an unexpected email from a major investor arrived with a sentence that would become heavier than any news clip. The email from a new investor was cool and businesslike: congratulations and a suggestion to leverage family networks. Beneath the optimism, an advisor's line worried me: sometimes family optics matter more than singular performance. I understood what he meant: companies raise on stories as much as spreadsheets. But as people started to angle their comments and offers toward my sister, I noticed something else. Behind polite advice, some folks began to treat me like an accessory to someone else's narrative. At a board meeting, a senior advisor recommended bringing in a PR firm to manage the family image. He suggested my mother be positioned as a local success story and my sister as an aspirational figure. I raised my eyebrows. "This is about the product, not our family magazine," I said. My comment was met with polite nods and a strategic silence. Afterward, my CFO pulled me aside, eyes careful. There's a line in our contracts that lets early investors weigh in on public narratives, he said. I hadn't read that clause carefully. I had trusted signatures. That day I learned that diligence is more than numbers, it's about the paper and the people attached to it. When I pushed back, the issue shifted from strategy to character. People who had supported me privately now suggested I was difficult for refusing to play along. My sister, the golden child, messaged, "We should celebrate this more." I tried to explain my discomfort. I wanted credit to be honest and for family to support rather than absorb. The conversation turned into a suggestion that I was too proud. The next humiliation would be intimate, and it would come from inside my house. Tap like so this story reaches someone who needs it. It was my birthday 2 weeks later. I invited the people who mattered, a few close investors, the team, and family. I wanted it small, a backyard barbecue with fairy lights and a cake. The night felt vulnerable in that way real success does. You want to share it with the people who watched you build. My mother took the mic to toast me. The air smelled of smoke and citrus and the sound of distant traffic. Laid-back songs drifted from a speaker. My father clapped hard like he was trying to make up for lost years. My mother's toast began gracious. She praised my work ethic, my late nights, and she smiled like she always did when she wanted to be kind. Then she added something that landed me in the center of a private humiliation. When Forbes called, I was so proud. I told everyone, of course. But if I'm honest, I always thought your sister would be the one in that spotlight. The crowd shifted. Laughter that felt like knives. The investors glanced at each other, small smiles playing like levers. My sister laughed in a way that felt rehearsed. I felt the room tilt. My stomach soured. The moment was private in the sense that it should have stayed in our living room, and public because all my guests now had a new narrative. I was the surprise, a deviation from my family's script. My mother's words were sandpaper, rubbing away years of quiet proof. I wanted to tell her to stop, to correct the record, to remind everyone of the nights I coded until dawn, of the contracts I rewrote, of the nights I ghosted social life for balance sheets. But the words lodged behind my teeth. After the toast, people approached me with sympathy masked as advice. "Maybe you should step back," one investor said. "Let the family handle some PR." It felt like they were offering solutions to a problem some of them had helped create. Private humiliation is its own kind of violence, not physical, but exacting. It redefines how people see you, as a footnote or a surprise instead of the author of your own life. I decided then that this would stop. It was the first time I said, in my head, no more. The turning point was not dramatic. There were no raised voices, no slammed doors, just a small, private moment standing in my kitchen at 3 a.m, the house breathing behind me. I had replayed the toast in the Forbes segment and the investor emails until they felt like wallpaper. I realized I was exhausted not from work but from being made to shrink. I remember standing under the cold kitchen light, the hum of the refrigerator like a distant ocean. I said aloud, "No more." The words echoed in the tile and felt like a promise. Not vengeance in the cinematic sense, no rage-fueled schemes, but a decision to use what I had built, documents, dates, contracts, receipts, and a public record. I would not be gaslit into a footnote. I would use paperwork and quiet exposure to reclaim the narrative. I began with the folder I kept under my desk, the one with scanned contracts, email chains, invoices, and unusual entries. I cataloged favors that became expectations, payments that went to shell consultancies, repeated suggestions in board minutes about leveraging family ties. When you build a company, habits create traces. I followed each trace like a breadcrumb. I hired a lawyer who specialized in corporate governance. I told her, simply, I want everything clear. No theatrics. Just truth. That night I wrote a plan that had 3 parts: document everything, neutralize any conflicts of interest, and, if necessary, expose the facts in a way that would not damage the company but would force accountability. It was surgical, careful, and lawful. I did not want revenge that mirrored the cruelty I'd been shown. I wanted justice that could stand in the light. The next step involved a choice I'd never thought I'd make: to go public with private papers. Comment if you've ever felt this kind of betrayal. Planning felt like assembling a quiet orchestra. Hire the right counsel, get forensic accounting, preserve communications, and be ready to act. My lawyer drafted letters to the board outlining potential conflicts and requested an independent audit. We contacted an external auditor who could trace funds and interpret the convoluted payments. My CFO was nervous. Some board members were surprised. My sister called me to ask why I had involved so many people. I told her simply that oversight was standard. She sounded hurt. I felt a twinge of guilt that I calmed into resolve. The auditors found what I had suspected: a recurring pattern of payments routed to a consultancy with ties to a few board members' friends, and a series of PR suggestions that seemed less about the company and more about building a family brand. There were contracts with footnotes that implied preferential treatment. Nothing illegal at that moment, but ethically questionable, and certainly something investors should know. I took care to maintain calm and keep motives clear. I wrote memos that were factual and unemotional. I wanted to avoid a showy confrontation. I wanted the truth to lead. This is the kind of revenge I trust: not drama, but clear, undeniable evidence that makes the other party choose between accountability and continued illusion. I set up a secure folder of documents, organized by date, and shared it with the independent auditor and my counsel. We created a timeline that started with invoices and ended with the birthday toast. My mother called frequently, worried. "Are you sure this is not too harsh?" she asked. The line tugged. I told her that bringing facts into the open is the only way to stop patterns from continuing. "I know," she said, "but people will pick sides." That was inevitable. Justice rarely looks like consensus. When the board voted to review the documents, someone leaked a portion, and then the whispers accelerated. Leaks happen when pressure builds. Someone on the board, perhaps uncomfortable, perhaps threatened, circulated a summarized memo to certain investors asking for guidance. The memo contained redacted notes and suggested an internal conflict. A journalist with a reputation for thoughtful business reporting reached out, asking for comment. I could have retreated. Instead, I chose to control the narrative. I prepared a statement, concise and factual. We had engaged an independent auditor. We were committed to transparency, and until the audit concluded, speculation would be unhelpful. But I also authorized the auditor to speak on the record about procedures and likely outcomes. The paper trail, emails, invoices, minutes, spoke clearly when read in sequence. We released an executive summary with the audit's findings: preferential payments to third parties linked to board associates, undisclosed advisory agreements, and PR suggestions that used the company's platform to elevate private family agendas. The response was immediate. Some investors were angry, some were relieved that an issue had finally been clarified. My family was in the mix of it all. My mother's name appeared in some emails as a potential beneficiary of curated narratives. My sister's company had received a small contract whose procurement process had unclear justification. The press ran with the idea of family optics and ethical governance. I watched headlines form in real time: startup founder exposes governance concerns and family ties under scrutiny. This was not the satisfying cinematic exposure I imagined as a kid. It was tedious and precise and public in a way that stripped away any comfort. The company's stock, we were public by then, dipped briefly. The board convened emergency meetings. My name was on Forbes again, but the headlines had softened into a more complicated picture. I felt a strange mixture, vindication for calling attention to the facts, and sorrow for the personal fallout that was inevitable when you hold a mirror up to those you love. Subscribe for more stories like this one. The board faced choices: recuse implicated members, amend procurement practices, and require oversight of external engagements. Some chose to resign rather than be reviewed. Others accepted new governance measures. I insisted on measures that protected the company and allowed those who erred to make amends without spectacle. I wanted accountability, not theatrical punishment. At home, the air changed. Family dinners were awkward. My mother would call and then hang up without saying anything. My sister went on the defensive, sending messages about how I had humiliated her and our parents. Friends took sides. It was public, and it was private, a double exposure that felt like the sun on a wound. One night, after a long day of meetings, my father showed up on my doorstep with an old photo album. He sat on my couch and slowly opened it. For a long time he didn't speak. He showed me pictures of us as kids, drawing attention to small things he remembered. "I'm proud," he said quietly, surprised by how the words landed heavy and necessary. It was a gentle, human moment that reminded me why I had wanted family to understand. Justice and family can coexist, but they require honesty. The public moment that settled everything would come at an investors' summit, and it would be undeniable. The investors' summit was the crucible. Hundreds gathered, press were present. Board members, investors, and analysts sat in rows of chrome chairs. I prepared to speak carefully. This wasn't about theatrics, it was about presenting the facts and the measures the company had taken in response. I remembered the kitchen ceiling at 3 a.m. and the quiet no more that had started everything. I went on stage with a single slide, a timeline. I walked the room through contracts, invoices, and decisions. I used simple language, pointing out where processes failed and where oversight had been lacking. I did not name my family for vengeance, I named structural weaknesses. But when I did address the emails and the contracts that inadvertently favored family ventures, the room's atmosphere shifted. The auditors were clear, the patterns were unethical though not criminal. The board's response, resignations and new policies, was already in motion. At the end of the talk, an analyst asked a pointed question: was this intentional favoritism? I answered evenly: the audit shows coordination that benefited personal projects. That matters because a company's trust is its most valuable asset. There was no applause, only the hum of people processing that trust had been compromised and that leadership had acted. In that moment, the truth was undeniable, not because I shouted it, but because the documents did. The company implemented reforms on the spot: procurement transparency, third-party oversight, and a commitment to separate private interests from public company resources. After the summit, people came to speak. Some thanked me for protecting the company's integrity. Others, surprising me, said they appreciated the way I'd avoided spectacle. It felt like a clean strike, a surgical correction, not a vendetta. The aftermath would change relationships, and yet something unexpected happened when the dust settled. If this moved you, tap like and share it so someone else who's going through this can find their way. After the summit, life knit itself back together in new ways. Some relationships frayed beyond repair, others deepened. My sister and I had long, awkward conversations, not reconciliations but attempts at understanding. She admitted later that she had felt pressure to perform and that our family's dynamics had informed her choices as much as any external ambition. It didn't excuse anything, but it humanized a person I'd sometimes demonized in my head. My mother reached out eventually, in a handwritten note that felt old-fashioned and genuine. She asked for dinner, not to plead or to justify, but to listen. I said yes, partly because I wanted family to understand, partly because I wanted to be the person I had always wanted to be, clear, steady, and kind when possible. The company instituted new measures that protected minority shareholders and created a family education initiative about governance for founders. It felt like a bridge between systems and the people who built them. Financially and reputationally, there were costs and recoveries. The stock returned to its growth trajectory after the reforms. New investors came because the company now displayed something increasingly rare: integrity under pressure. My name on Forbes remained, but the narrative had shifted from singular glamour to a story about stewardship and accountability. I did not win in the way television scripts promise. There was no dramatic gloating, no scene of someone ruined overnight. What I gained was cleaner policies that would prevent future conflicts, an auditor's report that preserved the company's future, and a personal boundary that allowed me to say no more without shame. What I lost included some naive ideas about unconditional family loyalty and a few relationships that could not be repaired. That balance felt fair in its clarity. The lessons settled into me like a second skin. When family praise came later, it carried a new authenticity. My mother, once guarded and performative, began asking me questions about governance and ethics in ways that suggested a real change in perspective. My sister found her own lane that didn't depend on borrowed platforms. We did not go back to how things had been, we moved forward in an altered shape. In the end, the revenge, if you can call it that, was quiet. It was not about destroying people but about restoring truth. The truth was won through patience, documentation, and legal clarity, not through spectacle. If you've been through something similar, subscribe, there are more stories like this. Standing at my desk years later, the city light filtering through blinds, I sometimes think about that moment under the kitchen light when I said, no more. That was the seed. The path after was paperwork and courage and a willingness to be uncomfortable. Justice, I learned, is not always dramatic. Often it's a series of small, stubborn decisions: to keep emails, to hire an auditor, to speak calmly on stage. It's choosing clarity over comfort and truth over the easy applause of family optics. I want to leave you with something practical, because that's the kind of revenge I trust. Document, document, document. Keep receipts. Save emails. If you suspect conflicts, get independent review. If you fear humiliation, know this: public attention rarely leaves the quiet facts alone. When the facts compile, they become a chorus that drowns out gossip. And a final, quieter note: people are complicated. Those who hurt us are sometimes doing harm born from fear, jealousy, or their own wounds. That understanding doesn't excuse what they did, but it can make accountability less about annihilation and more about restoration. That's the path I chose: realignment, not obliteration. If this story landed with you, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. It helps remind me why these stories matter.